Hey guys, tonight we're setting out on a journey through snowfields and star-glazed skies to uncover how the Sami people, those quiet masters of the Arctic, found their way across vast, frozen landscapes without a compass, a map, or even a decent weather app. Picture this. You're trudging through knee-deep snow, the wind nibbling at your ears, and your only guide is a reindeer and some lichen on a tree. Sounds like a bad survival reality show, right? You probably wouldn't survive this, but Sami, they've been doing it for centuries without fanfare, GPS, or dramatic theme music. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink against the sharp sting of Arctic air, pulling your furs tighter. Around you is silence pure, blanketed, almost too quiet. There's no glowing path to follow, no friendly signs that say, next rest stop, 12 reindeer length. But the Sami people have walked this land for thousands of years, and they've never needed signs. You're just now stepping into their rhythm. It's not about walking blindly through the snow. It's about walking with knowledge etched into all your bones. The Sami, traditionally semi-nomadic, especially the reindeer herders among them, navigate using a deep sensory awareness of land and sky. No compass, no problem. When your great-grandparents showed you the same snow-laden ridge 20 winters in a row, you start to notice things others mislike. How a certain tree bends after a storm, or which part of the hill stays sunlit the longest. The landscape itself becomes a familiar, if chilly, friend. You follow a narrow trail, one that looks like nothing more than a shadow on the snow. But it's a well-worn reindeer migration route, passed down through generations, like a family recipe for survival. In the soft crunch beneath your feet, you're stepping where hundreds have stepped before, and not one of them needed a compass. They had memory, and memory ran deeper than any magnetic pull. Historians still argue whether this wayfinding ability was purely observational or partly intuitive. Some even wonder if there was a sixth sense put involved. But for the Sami, there's no mystical aura to it. It's just living. It's knowing that this mountain's curve points northeast, that this stream, when it freezes just right, hums in a pitch that says you're close to the coast. Okay, maybe not literally humming, but it might as well be. And yes, there are tales, some a bit quirky, like the belief that if your boots start to stick unusually in the snow, you might be stepping over a sidey, a sacred place where spirits dwell. No, these spirits won't pull you off course, but the elders would gently tell you to tread lightly, out of respect. You chuckle quietly at the idea. Frozen boot glue equals spirits. But then again, haven't you ever gotten the creeps by in an empty room for no reason? As your breath puffs out in soft clouds, you begin to feel the rhythm of the land underfoot. The Sami didn't carve trails through this region so much as they danced across it. Their journeys weren't linear either. They followed animals, weather patterns, resource cycles. If you tried to follow their routes with a modern map, you'd think they were lost. But they weren't. They just didn't believe in straight lines when the wind and snow certainly didn't either. And speaking of wind, did you know the Sami have more than one word for it? Not just cold or icy, but wind that whispers, wind that hisses over snow ridges, and wind that carries the scent of birch bark from a distant fire. Each gust is a little different, and those differences mattered when you were out here in a whiteout, trying to find the nearest camp before. Your eyebrows froze off. The snowflakes swirl around you like dancers, catching in the folds of your hood. You pause to look behind nothing but your footprints vanishing into the white. It's easy to think you're utterly alone, but the Sami would tell you otherwise. The land is never empty. It's full of signs, subtle, silent, and stubbornly refusing to explain themselves to strangers. And still, you walk, not confidently, maybe, but with growing curiosity. Every hill crest reveals another stretch of unmarked wilderness that somehow, impossibly, the Sami know like the back of their gloved hands. You wonder how they remember it all. There are no markers, no stones with smiley faces or carved arrows. But then you notice it, a dip in the ridge that's ever so slightly deeper, a patch of moss that glows faintly under snow. Details. That's the secret. They see what others miss, and they pass that sight down in stories, songs, and those long silences around the fire when someone just says, "That way," and points, so you go that way. Because sometimes direction doesn't come from tools or maps. It comes from trust in the land, in tradition. And in that uncanny way, the Sami always seem to know where they're going. Even when the snow erases everything behind and ahead, you tilt your head back, your breath catching for a second as the Arctic sky opens up above you. Bend, a swirl of green and violet auroras stretches across the heavens like someone spilled paint on black velvet. It's not just pretty, it's practical. For the Sami, the sky isn't just scenery. It's a map, a glowing, twinkling, occasionally unpredictable map, but a map nonetheless. Stars mean something up here. In the deepest winter, when the sun disappears for weeks at a time, the night sky becomes your only ceiling and your guidebook. You squint now, picking out something familiar. A tilted line of 3 stars. Orion's belt, maybe. The Sami had their own names. Of course, Bojanasti, the North Star, and Jiskarast, the skewed path of the Milky Way. The North Star, that one was their anchor, always floating steady above the northern horizon. If you can find that star, you'll never be truly lost. That's not folklore, it's just comfort in the cold. But then there's the real showstopper, the Aurora Borealis. The Sami call it Gusars, meaning the light you can hear, which sounds poetic until you realize some people really do claim to hear faint crackling noises when the lights ripple. Historians still argue whether that's a trick of the ear or something more bizarre. But either way, the Sami paid attention, not just to the light, but to where it arched, how fast it moved, how it danced across the mountains. Because, apparently, it danced differently depending on wind patterns and air pressure. Nature's weather report in shimmering technicolor. You follow the Sami's lead now, staring upward, not for wonder, but for orientation. If the auroras are strongest in the northeast, it might be a warning. A storm is curling in from that direction. If they form a low, lazy arc to the west, the next few days might bring clear skies and easier travel. And if they swirl straight above you like a halo, well, better find shelter. That one's usually bad news. It's funny you used to think of stars as romantic. Something you point out on a date or slap on a poster next to an inspirational quote. But to the Sami, they're tools. Gentle, glowing tools. Some elders claim they can name dozens of stars and trace them like old friends. And not just for fun. They tell stories through the stars, encoding practical information in myth, like the tale of the hunter who chased a reindeer across the sky and now marks the changing seasons with his chase. It's charming, sure, but it's also a reminder of when the reindeer move and where to go to follow them. There's a quieter moment now, the kind where the wind takes a nap and the world settles into itself. You look up again and notice the darkness between the stars. Even the gaps seem to mean something. The Sami say that when the Milky Way seems blurry and thick, the air is full of moisture bad for sledding, may be good for fishing. That kind of observational skill isn't learnt in a book. It's lived year after year, night after night, under skies like this one. Here's a strange little tidbit for you. Some Sami believe the northern lights are alive, not metaphorically like, literally alive. Don't whistle at them, they say, or they'll swoop down and snatch your hat or your head, depending on who's telling the story. Of course, scientists will roll their eyes, talking about charged particles and solar winds. But let's be honest, if you were out here alone, with those lights dancing above you like spirits with attitude, wouldn't you be a tiny bit careful too? Anyway, superstition or not, the lights serve a purpose. They can show distance. If the colors are sharp and bright, it means they're close, reflecting off the snow and ice with eerie clarity. If they're faded or smeared out, they're farther off, sometimes hinting at valleys or ridges you can't see in the dark. You're beginning to get the idea now. The sky isn't decoration. It's a narrative, one that changes depending on where you stand and how closely you're paying attention. Historians still debate how much formal star knowledge was taught in Sami communities versus how much was just absorbed, like osmosis, from childhood walks. Spend winter camping. There's no curriculum, no star chart exam, just elders telling younger herders to watch the sky. And those younger herders gradually learning that a certain flicker of light means home is that way. You brush frost off your gloves and keep walking. Somewhere behind you, the stars you saw earlier have shifted. Not a lot, just enough to remind you that time is passing. The Sami used the stars not just for direction, but for tracking time. When Orion rises low and early, they might say, the ice is thick enough to cross the lake. Not a clock, not a calendar, just celestial nudges that you're in the right season at the right time. And as for compasses, magnetic north is nice and all, but it can't tell you whether the lake ahead is frozen properly, or if the ridge is shaded enough to hold wolf tracks. Stars can't either. Not exactly, but they help place you in a bigger picture. A slower, quieter one. The kind where movement is deliberate, not rushed. Where orientation isn't just about knowing where you are, but where you are in relation to the world. So you walk on, not chasing the stars, but letting them frame your journey. The auroras fade a little now, settling into a gentler ripple. The stars feel closer somehow, like they've been watching you walk for a very long time. And maybe, just maybe, they have. You kneel for a moment, brushing snow aside with your glove, revealing nothing more than frozen moss and packed earth. To you, it looks like an accident of nature, blank white canvas interrupted by random humps, put and dips. But the Sami see something very different. To them, this is a memory map, and you're standing on a well-traveled highway that's never been paved. Reindeer trails, invisible to the untrained eye, are carved not with shovels or stone, but with repetitions, centuries of movement, year after year, hoof after hoof. You follow the trail now, not because you see it clearly, but because your Sami guide pointed at a stand of crooked trees and said, that way. And now, like a kid trying to remember the steps to a dance, you start to pick it up, the rhythm of a route remembered more by feel than by sight. It's odd how quickly the landscape starts to organize itself in your mind. That tilted rock, a landmark. That frozen stream, a signpost. The route bends just before the ridge, of course, it does. You think you're discovering these things, but really, you're walking inside someone else's memory. The Sami have passed these mental maps from generation to generation, not on paper, but through stories, experience, and repetition. It's navigation by inheritance. One mainstream historical fact here. The Sami reindeer herding lifestyle covers territories spanning across Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia's Kola Peninsula. Their migration routes can stretch hundreds of kilometers, followed with unshakable confidence, without a single road sign. Try doing that with just Apple Maps and hope your phone battery doesn't freeze out here. What's even stranger is how accurate their routes remain, despite all the seasonal changes. Snow covers everything. Rivers freeze or disappear. Trees lose their leaves. And still, the path is there, somehow invisible but reliable. Historians still argue whether the Sami memorized their surroundings through unique spatial memory training, or whether they simply lived so deeply in tune with the land that it became second nature. Either way, you're beginning to see the truth. They didn't navigate in straight lines. They navigated through familiarity. Here's a quirk. Some Sami herders speak of feeling a trail underfoot, even when it's buried under snow. They Describe it like you might describe Dacia Vuon. Uncanny sense that this is the right way, even if nothing looks recognizable. Scientists have no term for this. Sami elders just shrug and say, "You know it when you walk it. You step more carefully now." Eyes scanning for subtle clues. A small tuft of grass where the snow is thinner. A set of animal tracks crossing perpendicular, perhaps wolves or foxes. Your Sami guide taught you earlier that reindeer often avoid routes that intersect predator paths, even if the latter are days old. Reindeer don't read maps, but they remember danger. And here's the kicker. So do the people. You pause near a slight dip in the trail, and your guide tells you that 3 generations ago, a herder lost most of his herd right there when the snow collapsed over a hidden ravine. No signs mark it, no warnings. But every herder since has been told the story and avoids the place instinctively. That's oral mapping, and it works surprisingly well. You've probably heard of song lines in Aboriginal, Australian culture where paths across the land are memorized through song. The Sami do something similar, though with less melody and more rhythm. A herder might mutter to themselves while walking, "Hill, dip left of the pine, frozen stream, wind from the north." It's like a verbal breadcrumb, trail functional poetry. And when the snow melts, more clues appear. Stone circles that mark seasonal camps, fire pits half buried under grass. Even the way plants grow really can indicate where trails lie. Reindeer trample vegetation into patterns that last beyond one season, leaving a subtle green fingerprint you can only see if you know what to look for. You step over one now, unsure at first, until your guide nods. Yes, that's part of the trail. You might be wondering why they never just drew maps. Some did in limited ways, simple reindeer skin sketches or marks on birch bark. But for the most part, these routes weren't meant to be read. They were meant to be walked, felt, sung, repeated. The Sami didn't need permanent signs because they weren't trying to fix the land in place. They were trying to move through it with grace. Think of it like dance. You don't write down every step, you move through it again and again until your body remembers. That's how the Sami navigate with their feet, their minds, and a connection to the land so strong it doesn't need ink to make it real. Now, your legs are getting tired. The snow is deeper here, and the wind picks up again. But you keep moving, drawn forward by something you can't quite name. A memory that isn't yours. A trail made by someone who never imagined GPS or signs or modern shortcuts. Just trust in the land and the stories it tells. If you're willing to listen, you crest another hill, and the view opens more snow, more shadows, more silence. Yet you feel oddly certain this is the way. Because the trail may be invisible, but now it's starting to feel familiar. Your boots crunch softly into the crust of snow as the wind settles into a hushed murmur. All around you, the Arctic world holds its breath. In this quiet, something ancient awakens, not in the land, but in you. You start noticing details that never caught your attention before. The angle of a drift, the way the snow clings to one side of a tree, the rhythm of the wind against your hood. These aren't just weather quirks, they're messages. And the Sami, they've been reading them like morning headlines for thousands of years. Snow, believe it or not, isn't just snow. It's texture, it's time, it's travel conditions. There's a word the Sami use, sika, to describe snow. That's crusty on top but soft beneath, good for walking, bad for pulling a sled. And then there skata, loose, dry powder that makes your footsteps vanish within seconds. Great for hiding, terrible for efficiency. You glance at the snow under your feet, now firm enough to support your weight without sinking too deeply. That's a good sign. And here's your mainstream historical fact of the section. The Sami language includes over 180 words for snow and ice. That's not just a trivia nugget. It's a sign of how intimately they observed their environment, where others might just call it deep or fresh. They'd say goskskadi for mid-depth snow between shrubs, or moari for icy crust that squeaks when stepped on. These aren't poetic embellishments. These are survival-level vocabulary. As you trudge forward, you start to see how much the Sami relied on snow behavior to decide their routes. If the snow is jig, or dense and heavy, it might signal melting, or worse, coming freeze. Travel fast, or risk getting stuck. If it's sichi, a kind of wind-blown snow that accumulates in waves, it means the path ahead might be buried. Better take the higher ridge. You squat down to brush your glove over the surface. It's cold, sure, but dry. A powder that doesn't cling to your fingers. Your Sami guide earlier would have called this RVI and smiled. Ideal for skis. You wouldn't know that if you weren't listening to the snow. Historians still debate whether the Sami developed these snow classifications consciously, or whether it was simply linguistic evolution born from necessity. After all, when snow is your floor, your roof, your obstacle, and your road, you start giving it names. Lot of them. Here's your fringe tidbit for the hour. Some Sami herders claim they can hear different types of snow crunch beneath their sled runners, like music. Not just a difference between fresh and crusted, but between snow that fell under full moonlight versus cloud cover. Is that real? Who knows? But if you lived out here long enough, maybe your ears would start picking up symphonies to Dot and the window. Don't even get started on the wind. That's not background noise. That's navigation, too. The Sami red wind, like the rest of us, check a weather app. A high-pitched whistle through the birch trees. That's wind coming over frozen lakes. Faster, colder, dangerous for firelighting. A low, slow moan. That's the ridge winds coming from the south, warmer, moister air on the move. Might be snow coming, might be rain. Both are annoying. You pause as a gust swirls past, carrying a fine mist of snow. It sparkles for a second in the weak sunlight before vanishing. It's beautiful, but also revealing. The Sami would tell you that kind of snow powder drift only forms when temperatures are below -12 Celsius and the wind carries snow from flat ground. You're no meteorologist, but how you're learning. You'll move on more deliberately now. Every crunch and creak becomes a conversation. You notice a change in slope, just a few degrees, but the snow changes with it, more compact, denser, heavier underfoot. You've moved into siku, a term for bend, snow hardened by the sun. It reflects light better too. You squint. .1 Sami trick. If your shadow is blurry, you're probably walking into wind-driven powder. If your shadow's sharp and dark, the snow is harder, smoother, easier to cross, but colder. Pew, check your shadow. Now fairly sharp. Good. Maybe you'll get to that next rise without slipping, like a startled penguin. And then there's reindeer again. You find their tracks dainty, but deliberate, arrowing straight across your path. The Sami read those like news updates. If the hoof prints are splayed and shallow, the reindeer were relaxed. If they're deep and clustered, the herd was spooked, maybe wolves nearby, and the snow they trample. It shows not just direction, but mood. That's right, mood snow. Bet your GPS doesn't offer that setting. Now you come upon a snowbank that curves slightly upward, wine-sculpted, almost like a wave frozen in place. The Sami call that bassi, and it's useful for estimating wind direction over the last few hours. From the east, maybe. That explains the chill biting the left side, blend of your face. The air thickens with cold again, and you pull your scarf higher. Your breath fogs in slow, ghostly wisps. It all slows down, out here the walking, the thinking, even time itself. But your awareness sharpens. You begin to understand what the Sami have always known. Snow isn't just a thing that falls. It's a language, a shifting script that only stays legible if you pay attention. So you do. You listen. You watch. And you walk each step a little more confident than the last. Each gust of wind now less a threat and more a whisper. You won't become an Arctic whisperer overnight, but for now, you're no longer just surviving out here. You're beginning to read. You wake in the morning beneath the layers of fur and wool, surrounded by a silence so deep it feels physical, like the snow itself has muffled the entire world. Your breath curls into the frozen air, and somewhere nearby, a reindeer snorts a soft, sleepy sound that grounds you in the moment. You sit up slowly, blink away the cold, and step outside into the pale Arctic light. What time is it? Good question. The sun barely rises this time of year. It just sort of rolls along the horizon like it's lost and a little lazy. Time out here isn't measured by clocks. It's measured by movement your own. The herds, the stars, the season. That's what you're going to learn today. Because the Sami didn't need wristwatches or sundials to keep track of time. They had the sky, the reindeer, and a natural rhythm that modern calendars could only dream of understanding. You look up, blinking at the soft grey light. No sunrise, no real shadows, but the Sami know exactly what part of the day it is. They've divided their daily routine into practical chunks: feeding, resting, migrating, preparing. It's not 2:30 p.m. It's midway between the sun's high and the evening feed. They lived attuned to the earth's subtle shifts, and as you walk across the snow, you start tuning into them too. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Long before mechanical clocks were common in the north, the Sami used seasonal celestial patterns to measure not only daily time, but migration schedules. Their year is split into 8 distinct seasons, yes. 8: spring, early summer, summer, late summer, autumn, early winter, winter, and late winter. Each marks a shift in temperature, light, and animal behavior. Their entire lifestyle, movement, fishing, gathering, even spiritual rituals follows that 8-part year like a symphony. You notice the sun now, a dim disk skimming the treetops. In Sami tradition, its path across the sky is more than a source of Hittites, a celestial compass. In winter, it stays low and hides for days, or even weeks, depending on where you are in Sami. In summer, it refuses to set, circling the sky, like a nosy neighbor who never leaves. Navigating by the sun here isn't about height or shadow length. It's about angle and rhythm. You begin to understand. To survive here, you don't fight the light. You follow it. There's also a fascinating fringe tidbit. Some Sami elders claim they can tell the time by how the light reflects off snow crystals' warmer hues in the afternoon, sharper whites in the morning. There's no science backing this, Bob, yet. But once you spend a few days in this frozen world, you start to believe it might be possible. Or maybe the mind just finds meaning when it desperately needs to. You keep walking, following your guide to the next waypoint. The reindeer are stirring, their breath steaming, their hooves already leaving new prints in the snow. You can't help but smile. They seem to know where they're going, even when you don't. And here's where it gets really clever. The reindeer's seasonal movements form their own kind of clock. Sami herders observe the herd's restlessness in early spring as a sign to begin migration. When the calves begin nibbling at birch shoots, it's early summer. When the males start clashing antlers and stomping in the snow, that's rutting season autumn, unmistakably. Historians still argue whether the Sami first organized their time around celestial events or the needs of their animals. It's a bit of a chicken or egg dilemma, but either way, the outcome is the same. Time in Sami is elastic, biological, lunar, animal, and visual all at once. You pause to look at the trees. There's frost on the south-facing trunks, but not on the north. That's a trick your guide taught you yesterday. If you're ever unsure of direction during low sun months, check which side of the trees has the heaviest frost or moss. It's not foolproof, but it beats guessing. Another quirky Sami practice. Snow shadows. On certain clear days, the shadows cast by snowdrifts tell time better than your smartphone. The trick is to watch how fast the blue moves across the white faster. In early day, slower at evening. You squint, trying to see it yourself. Maybe you'll get there eventually. Time for the Sami is also about sound. In some dialects, there are words for the quiet between distant howls, or the pause before a raven calls. You think that's nonsense until you experience it yourself. A space of silence so consistent, so rhythmic, you begin to measure your footsteps by it. Out here, that might be the closest thing to seconds ticking. Even sleep is seasonal. In deep winter, the Sami traditionally slept more long, restorative hours that synced with the long night. In summer, they rested lightly, rising at odd hours to tend to the animals or gather food. Imagine tossing your 95 out the window and replacing it with a rhythm that responds to moonlight and mushrooms. Not a bad deal, really. You reach the next encampment now, a semicircle of wooden sleds and smoke rising lazily from a tarp-covered tent. Your guide nods toward the fire. Someone hands you a bowl of warm broth, and you sit on a worn reindeer hide, listening to the crackle. No one's in a rush. No one's checking the time. And maybe that's the point. The Sami didn't just survive. Without clocks, they thrived by syncing themselves to a deeper tempo. A rhythm set not by ticking gears, but by frost, fur, sun, and snow. You sip your broth slowly, the warmth blooming in your chest. The day rolls forward, not in hours, but in stories, and you're part of it now, gently ticking forward, step by snowy step. You wake before the fire crackles to life, wrapped in layers that still can't keep the cold entirely out, and watch the sky shift from black to a strange Arctic gray. A few reindeer are already moving in the distance, their breath fogging like old steam engines. You stretch slowly, your joints cracking like frozen branches. Another day, another directionless trudge. Except, of course, it's not directionless. Not when you've got the stars dot, because today you're learning how the Sami navigated by the night sky, not in the way sailors might have used stars on the open ocean, but in a more intimate, earthbound way. The Arctic sky isn't just something to admire. It's a map, a calendar, a clock, and sometimes a warning. And tonight, if the clouds part, you'll get to read it for yourself. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Sami, like many indigenous peoples, used constellations not just for navigation, but to guide seasonal decisions: when to migrate, when to fish, when to prepare for the long dark. Their star maps were not the same as those drawn by Western astronomers. They had their own constellations, like Sami Antler, which stretched across the sky to mark a key time of year for reindeer mating and movement, Orion's belt. They called that one part of the bow used by a mythical hunter whose arrows marked the time to begin winter preparations. It's a quiet art, this kind of reading. You lean back against a frost-bitten tree and squint up. Not much to see yet, but come nightfall, the stars will bloom like frost on glass. And once you know what to look for, you'll never see randomness again. Now, here's your quirky tidbit of the hour. The Sami believed that stars weren't just lights, but campfires lit by ancestral spirits. each one a hearth of someone who came before, watching over their descendants. Some herders claimed that if you listened hard enough on still nights, you could hear soft whispering carried from those star camps. You shiver a little, not from cold this time, but from the strange comfort of that thought. Maybe someone's watching your clumsy steps through the snow and giving you a silent thumbs dash up dot as night finally begins to crawl in. Your guide points toward the horizon. You see it now low, faint but real. The North Star, not just a dot in the sky, but a fixed certainty in a spinning world. The Sami word for it, Bojanasti, translates simply to the star in the north. Elegant, efficient, extremely useful when the landscape turns into a white blur and all the trees start looking like clones of each other. And yet, they didn't rely on the North Star alone. Sami stargazers watched the slow arc of constellations as they moved across the sky, learning which clusters marked spring and which ones promised storms. Certain stars appearing earlier in the evening signaled earlier sunrises. Others foretold long stretches of bitter cold. You look at the sky now. With new eyes, it's less decorative, more functional, less twinkly, more tactical. Historians still argue whether the Sami borrowed celestial navigation from Norse or Siberian traditions, or whether their sky lore developed independently. What's fascinating is that their star use was incredibly localized. Unlike sailors who needed wide-angle directions, the Sami focused on tight, land-based markers, where a star rose behind a certain mountain, or how it reflected in a frozen lake at midnight. The sky wasn't a compass, it was a partner. You pause mid-thought as something strange and pale shimmers on the edge of your vision. At first, you think it's cloud, maybe even snow, but no, it ripples, it sways, it dances. The aurora.r. Yes, the northern lights, that brilliant, ghostly ribbon twisting across the sky like a forgotten melody. Most people think of them as a natural wonderland. They are, but for the Sami, they're far more than that. You remember your guide's warning from earlier. Never whistle at the lights. Never point. Don't mock them. Because, according to Sami belief, the lights are spirits powerful. One's hand drawing their attention can bring misfortune. And yet, those same lights were also used for navigation. Some elders say that the direction the aurora twists is the direction the wind will turn next. Others claim you can tell the health of a coming season by the brightness of the green. Not scientific, maybe, but when you've survived 1,000 winters by paying attention to nature, who needs lab data? You sit quietly now, letting the cold sneak in under your collar as you stare up at the aurora. It curls and stretches like a cat, pale green and violet, shimmering like it's alive. You can see how someone might think it's watching you, or laughing, or leading you somewhere. The Sami called it Guvzahas, which roughly translates to "be light you can hear." Some claim to hear crackles or pops when the aurora is especially active. Scientists haven't proven it, but up here, under this weird and wild sky, you kind of believe it anyway. Time fades, space folds. You start to feel very small, very awake, and very much part of a story older than maps or apps. The sky becomes your ceiling and your compass. Your heart beats slower. You're not walking anymore. You're drifting through the land like a snowflake, guided by ancient fires above. Later, when you curl up again in your fur cocoon, you think back to the constellations, the antler, the bow, the spirits, the ancestors' campfires, and you fall asleep under their watch. Your thoughts gently pulled across the heavens by invisible threads of tradition, memory, and starlight. The fire's warmth clings to your cheeks as morning drifts in, slow and reluctant. The snow outside is still thick, still bright, and still completely impossible to tell direction in and less. Of course, you're Sami. Today, you're learning how the land itself can be read like a map. Rocks, rivers, trees, even the snowdrift, they all whisper little clues if you know how to listen. It's the kind of navigation that doesn't rely on devices or signs, just presence and memory, and maybe a little reindeer intuition. You start walking behind your guide, skis strapped to your feet, gliding across the crust of hardened snow. The terrain rolls gently hill, dip frozen creek. Another hill and you quickly lose any sense of where you've come from. But your guide moves with the relaxed confidence of someone strolling through their own kitchen. They pause by a clump of stunted birches and tap the bark. South-facing, they murmur. The bark is drier, more sun-inched. You nod like you understand. You sort of do. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Long before modern maps reached the north, the Sami built mental cartographies based on environmental detail. Not abstract grids, but lived-in trails. Follow the river until the twin rocks, past the hill that echoes, turn where the wind shifts in the pine forest. These weren't just directions, they were stories. Landmarks were named, remembered, and passed down like family recipes. Navigation was inherited knowledge, not something bought in a store. One of the oldest techniques, reading wind patterns. The Sami have dozens of words for windsoft ones, biting ones, sneaky ones, screaming ones. You stop atop a rise and your guide raises a finger. From the west, they say, pointing to a line of snow plumes brushing off the ridge. You squint. You can barely see it, but now that they've pointed it out, it's there. That thin breath of air leaving its signature on the landscape. There's also the matter of snowdrift shapes. The Sami can tell direction, recent weather, and even animal movement by the way the snow settles and leans. A snowbank bowed tightly on one side. That's the wind's doing. Uneven drifts near a rock. Maybe an animal passed last night. You crouch to inspect a patch, poke a stick into the crust. Fox, your guide says. You blink. They shrug. It popped. The quirky tidbit this time. Some Sami herders claim they can navigate by the taste of snow. Colder snow tastes thinner. One elder once told a researcher, snow near pine trees tastes older. Of course, scientists scoff at this, but after licking a few handfuls of snow and ignoring your better judgment, you start to wonder. Not that you'd admit it to anyone, As you continue, your guide points out a lichen-covered boulder. "That one's older than my grandfather," they say. The rock has a crack like a sleeping eye. It's been used as a turning marker for generations. It doesn't show up on any official map, but in Sami tradition, it's more trustworthy than a road sign. You pass it reverently. Here's the scholarly Tuguvor. Some historians argue that Sami navigation is primarily oral, passed down in stories, songs, and Joik traditional chanting. Others believe it's more practical than poetic, grounded in observational survival skills. The truth, of course, is likely both. You hear that in your guide's voice, a mix of reverence and this dash is dash how dash you dash dom, single quotes t dash die dash here practicality. The land is both myth and manual. You stop to rest beside a frozen stream. The ice groans faintly beneath its surface. Your guide throws a stick. It skids and stops. Too thin, they mutter, pointing to the edges where bubbles collect under. Play the crust. You file that away. Not because you plan to cross alone, but because it's the kind of thing that could one day save your life. Which is a fun little thought to fall asleep with later if you're into that kind of bedtime anxiety. Navigation here isn't just physical, it's emotional. You're told of a Sami concept known loosely as Radna, a kind of spatial memory tied to personal experience. It's how a herder can return to a birthing site from 10 years ago without a GPS, or how they sense they're near somewhere simply by the feel of the snow underfoot. It's hard to explain, but you think you're beginning to feel it too. There's a brief break as your guide shares dried fish and cloudberries. You sit on a rock shaped like a saddle, facing a windswept valley. If you ever get lost, your guide says between bites, listen for water, follow animals, look for 3 trees leaning together. That means people have passed here. You file it all away like sacred scripture. You keep moving, this time through a thickening forest. The trees close in, the light thins. No stars now, no sun, but the moss on the trunks, thicker on the north sides. The snow depth shifts ever so slightly between shaded and open areas. And somehow, even without checking anything, your guide announces, we're almost there. And just like that, you arrive at another shelter. Logs stacked in a triangle, smoke rising faintly from a gap. Someone's already inside, stirring something rich in a pot. You take off your outer layers and sink down by the fire, limbs tingling from the cold and the effort. You look back at where you came from, manned, still. You have no idea how they knew the way, but somehow they did. Every tree, every scent, every whisper in the snow gave them the answer. That's the thing about Sami navigation. It's not loud, it's not showy, it's quiet, layered, slow like the land itself. You realize, sipping a tin cup of warm broth, that you've just followed a map made of nothing but snow, wind, light, and instinct. And somehow it worked. You wake to the smell of pine smoke and the quiet, rhythmic sound of reindeer hooves crunching snow outside. They're not harnessed just wandering. grazing on lichen, living their strange, calm lives. You sit up slowly, still wrapped in a cocoon of furs, and for a moment you forget where you are. Then it comes back to you, not as a place on a map, but as a feeling. Wind in your teeth, stars overhead, and a forest that somehow knows your name. Asterisk. Today's lesson is subtler than the last. You won't be looking up at stars or following snowdrift clues. Instead, you'll be paying attention to sound. Yes, sound. Because out here, long before walkie-talkies and satellite phones, the Sami developed a brilliant way to communicate and navigate across vast, frozen distances. The joik, a joik, isn't quite a song. It's not a chant, not a poem. It's something closer to the essence of a thing, like a musical photograph. You don't sing about your friend. You joik your friend. You don't describe a mountain you joik. It's soul. That's the idea, anyway. And once you hear one out here in the silence, echoing over a snowfield, or bouncing between peaks, you'll never mistake it for anything else. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The joik is one of the oldest continuous musical traditions in Europe, with roots reaching back well before Christianity arrived in the Arctic North. Each joik is unique to a person, place, animal, or memory, and they're traditionally performed without instruments. Just the human voice carrying across space like a string tied between souls. In practical terms, the joik was also used to signal direction, danger, or simple presence. Imagine hearing your grandmother's joik drifting through the trees. You'd know she was near, that she was well, that you weren't alone. You and your guide are walking now, skis crunching softly. The land feels endless again. Your breath puffs in tiny clouds, then faintly, from somewhere ahead, you hear it. A low, looping melody, not quite singing, not quite humming, just a ripple in the air. Your guide pauses and smiles. Peas nearby, they say. As you move closer, the sound becomes clearer. You can't make out words because there are none. It's syllables and rhythm, and something almost primal behind it. A man steps from behind a tree, grinning wide. His cheeks are red, his coat stitched with bright blue and red trim. He joiked me, your guide says, clapping the man on the shoulder. So I knew to meet him here. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some elders claim a good joik can lead someone comb through a snowstorm better than a trail. The wind may wipe out your tracks, they say, but it can carry your joik for miles. In one old story, a man joiked himself for 3 days straight until his lost wife followed the sound to safety. And if you think that's far, remember that whales do it too, sing to find each other in the deep. Historians still argue whether joik served more as an artistic expression or a literal navigation aid. Some early missionaries banned it, claiming it was pagan and dangerous evidence of devilry. Others, especially modern scholars, see it as an early sonic GPS, emotional, cultural, and deeply functional. The man now joiks again, this time for you. It's gentle, repetitive, circling back on itself like snowfall. You can't tell what it means, exactly, but it feels like being seen. He gestures upward and mutters something about a river bend. The joik, it turns out, mimicked the shape. Put up the land a kind of oral map. You try one yourself. It's embarrassing, awkward, and your guide chuckles, but you keep going. Just syllables, made-up tones. They nod. Not bad, they say. You sound like a confused owl, but the mountain might recognize you. Later, you reach a frozen lake and pause for lunch. The wind is loud here, rolling across the flatness like it's got somewhere to be. Your guide picks up a curved piece, birch bark, and cups it to their mouth. They joik eganonly. This time, the bark acts like a megaphone. You hear the sound stretch farther, sharper, carried by the wind. That'll travel, they say. He'll hear it by nightfall, Sami. Reindeer herders still use joik, not just in ceremony, but as a tool. Sometimes to call animals, sometimes to soothe them, sometimes to mark presence in places where your voice might be the only thing standing between you and total erasure. And the landscape is a perfect amplifier. No cities, no static, no engines. Just your voice and the snow working together like old friends. The concept of place memory surfaces again here. To joik a path is to remember it out loud, to invite the land to recognize you as someone who belongs. Your guide says, each time you joik a trail, it becomes easier to follow next time. You wonder what your own trail sounds like, probably a bit out of tune. As the day winds down, you find yourself humming a tune. It's not quite a joik, but it wants to be. Maybe it's for the birch grove you passed, or the fox you spotted under the bluff. Or maybe it's just for the quiet that now fills your bones, not with loneliness, but with peace. The man who joiked earlier has vanished into the trees again, leaving only his song behind. You realize that out here, that's more than enough. A sound, a rhythm, a voice floating on Eret's direction. It's connection, it's proof you were here as you slide into your shelter for the night. That melody still loops in your head. Maybe tomorrow you'll try a joik for the stars. The morning arrives not as light, but as a change in tone. Darker shadows soften. The wind becomes less sharp, and your breath doesn't hang quite so heavily in the air. You blink yourself awake to find a reindeer nudging the shelter's edge with its nose, its antlers dusted in frost like delicate lace. It grunts softly, as if to say, "Let's get moving," and then meanders off. Today, you're learning about the real masters of Arctic navigation, the reindeer. Not by compass, not by maps, just by instinct and hooves. And possibly some ancient deal with the universe that scientists still haven't figured out. Because, yes, you're about to trail behind creatures who can find their way across hundreds of kilometers of trackless snow, even in a blizzard, without so much as a glance at the sky. Welcome to Sami reindeer herding, where the animals lead and the humans follow. You strap on your skis again, slightly more confident now, and follow your guide into the dawn. Ahead of you is a small herd, moving with calm purpose. Not panicked, not confused, just going somewhere. How do they know where? That's the magic part. Mainstream historical fact time. Reindeer herding is at the heart of traditional Sami life. The relationship is ancient, stretching back over 2,000 years. While many indigenous groups hunted reindeer, the Sami are one of the few who domesticated them for herding. Not quite livestock, not quite wild, they live in a weird, beautiful in-between. And because the land changes constantly, storms shift rivers, snow buries trails, winds erase paths, the Sami learned to rely on their reindeer's instincts for safe passage. You ski beside the herd, watching their steady rhythm. Occasionally one stops to sniff the air or scrape at a patch of snow with its hooves. They're looking for food, your guide explains, but also checking terrain. You ask if the animals ever get lost. Your guide laughs gently. No, but we do. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Sami elders say that reindeer have sky memory. They'll remember the smell of a lichen patch from years ago, the exact curve of a snowbank against a certain wind. One herder claims his lead doe could smell her way to summer pastures that hadn't been visited in 4 years. Is it scent? Is it memory? Or do they just have some kind of built-in northern Google Maps? The answer is yes, probably. You're moving steadily now, skis gliding, your breath syncing with the rhythm of the herd. Occasionally, a reindeer glances back, ears twitching as if to say, "Keep up, human." You're more than happy to oblige. Historians still argue whether the Sami actually domesticated reindeer first or whether it was a mutual decision. Some suggest the animals followed the people, drawn to salt and shelter. Others say the Sami shaped their culture entirely around reindeer behavior, adapting rather than taming. The truth, like with most things up here, is slippery. But what's certain is that the reindeer aren't tools, they're partners. Some even have names. They respond to voice, to joke, to body language. One shakes its antlers at you, annoyed. You offer a polite nod of apology. As the day stretches on, you reach a pass between 2 ridges where the wind always howls. Your guide says this is a place the reindeer know well. They never stop here, just go. And sure enough, the herd presses forward in a determined line, as though some ancient GPS has just whispered danger into their antlers. You follow, tucking your scarf tighter and pushing ahead. You pause for a rest near a gnarled old spruce tree, twisted into a spiral from decades of wind. A few of the reindeer dig into the snow with their hooves, scraping down to hidden lichens. You marvel at how they know it's there. Your guide tosses you a small piece. You chew, it tastes like cold bark and tea leaves. Not bad, honestly, then. A low hum, a joik again, from behind. Another herder has arrived, this one much younger. She doesn't speak much, just gestures toward the valley ahead. Her reindeer wear thin leather harnesses adorned with small bells enough to mark presence, not enough to jingle. Too much noise would scare the herd or mask warnings in the wind. Everything here is intentional. You learn that some herders paint tiny symbols on the antlers of their lead reindeer markings, only visible up close. It helps identify them in the whiteout. Others train theirs to respond to scent cloths tied to belts. Every herder has their own system. It's all trust, the younger woman says quietly. You let them guide, and they let you stay alive. As the sun dips again into the sleepy horizon, you reach another shelter, this one near a frozen creek carved into the land like a silver scar. The reindeer bunch together near a stand of trees, their breaths clouding in unison. You rest against a snowbank, cheeks flushed, legs sore but happy. Your guide offers dried reindeer meat and some kind of pungent cheese. You eat both without hesitation. Hunger makes everything taste like victory. As the fire crackles, you watch the herd settle calm, certain at home. And you realize that while you spent years trusting satellites and street signs, here it's the animals who carry the wisdom. They don't need explanations. They just go. They remember. They feel. And maybe that's the lesson. Sometimes, when you're completely lost, the best thing to do is follow someone, something who simply isn't. The reindeer snort softly in the dark. One turns to look at you. It's hard not to feel honored. You wake to silence. Not the kind of silence you get in a padded room or an empty house, but the kind that wraps the entire world in snow. A reindeer snorts nearby, steam curling from its nostrils like smoke from a sleepy kettle. Above, the sky glows that Arctic shade of blue so pale, it looks like someone gently erased the color from the heavens. Today, you're not skiing. Today, you walk slowly, because you're learning to read the smallest details in the snow. The Sami don't just move with the stars or follow the instincts of reindeer. They also interpret the delicate language written across the land itself. Snow is not just snow out here. It's memory, it's message, it's map.u. Step carefully into the powder, following your guide as they make wide, soft strides. They pause at a spot where the crust looks just slightly broken. To your untrained eyes, it's just a patch of white, but they kneel down and touch it gently, like a librarian leafing through an ancient manuscript. Fox, about 3 hours ago, they say, chasing something. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Traditional Sami hunters and herders could distinguish some say hundreds of snow conditions, each with its own name, texture, and meaning. There are separate terms for wet snow, crusted snow, snow you can walk on, snow you must crawl over, snow good for herding, snow that signals danger. It's not just vocabulary, it's survival. In the 1980s, a linguist catalogued at least 180 snow-related terms in North Sami. That's not overkill. That's just winter life. You follow your guide across a slope, and they point to another pattern. That's snowdrift shaped by southern wind. They mutter. Storm was from Norway. 2 nights ago. You blink. How do they know that? They shrug. The snow remembers. Here comes your quirky tidbit. Some Sami elders say snow can whisper warnings. One tale tells of a man who ignored a ripple in the crust, just a slight bend in the drift, and ended up tumbling into a hidden crevasse. The snow tried to tell him. They say he didn't listen. Another tale speaks of certain snow that glows faintly blue under a full moon. Those are the sleeping fields, one elder said. Walk quietly over them, or you'll wake the past. You step more carefully now. Your guide hands you a small curved stick, worn smooth. It's a snow reading tool, shaped to feel the layers beneath the top crust. They call it a quisquiero, meaning old woman's feeler, named, they say, because the elders were always the best at reading snow's mood. You run it along a patch and feel it catch slightly. A buried crust from yesterday's freeze. Layer of wind-hard snow. Your guide explains. You can ski on that, unless it breaks. Then you fall through. You pull your hand back like it's a hot stove. Historians still argue whether the Sami system of snow reading was purely practical or also spiritual. Some researchers believe it evolved entirely through trial and error. Others argue it borders on a kind of intuitive symbiosis with nature, honed over thousands of years. There's no clear answer, but what's undeniable is its accuracy. Satellite images and weather models might tell you what's coming, but a Sami elder could tell you where to walk today. How deep the snow lies by a certain birch tree, and which path the wolves used last night. You kneel beside a snowfield where faint tracks curve like stitched thread. Better hair, your guide says, but scared. See how the prints zigzag. You nod slowly. It's not just movement, it's mood. That's what the snow holds. Further on. You pass a hill where the snow is strangely flattened in a wide oval. Your guide smiles. That's a reindeer's sleeping spot. Maybe even the one who nudged your tent. You can almost hear the snores echoing off the snowdrift. You try to make out the subtle indentations, the way the animal curled, the way it breath-tanned. It feels almost sacred, like looking at a ghost that still lingers in body heat. Another interesting moment. Your guide leads you to a spot where the snow has collapsed in a strange pattern, like a handprint turned sideways. That's where we buried supplies last season. They whisper. You blink. It remembers even that. They nod. Snow doesn't forget. It only covers. You break for lunch near a frozen stream. The surface glassy and still. You sip warm broth from a tin cup, watching steam drift upward. The snow sparkles like sugar. Then your guide leans close and says, "Want to see the wind's handwriting?" You nod eagerly. They lead you to a ridge where the snow is swirled in long curls like icing on a cake, or the edge of a parchment rolled by invisible fingers. This is what the east wind looks like, they say. You nod reverently. Even the sky leaves notes out here. As you begin your slow return, you notice you're seeing things differently. That patch is darker. That means crust. Those tracks, dear, but relaxed. No zigzag. Over there, a dip in the snow where a bird took off. You almost feel proud of yourself. The land is no longer silent. It's full of tiny conversations, and you're just starting to listen. By the time you return to camp, the world feels more familiar like someone taught you to read in a new language. One made of footprints, flakes, and forgotten wind. The snow is still cold, still dangerous, still deep. But now, it's no longer just a backdrop. It's alive. And, like everything out here, it's trying to help if you're willing to slow down and understand. You wake up to a glow that's not quite daylight, just the sky shrugging off its night shirt. It's that pearly shimmer that always seems to come from nowhere, casting a soft silver across the land. A few embers in the fire pit still pulse with lazy warmth, but your attention is drawn upward, not to the trees, not to the hills, but to the sky itself. Because today you're learning how the Sami use the heavens to find their way. No compass, no GPS, just constellations, cloud whispers, and the flickering messages of the northern lights. You stretch your legs, now used to the gentle ache from days of movement. As you rub your hands together for warmth, your guide hands you a wooden cup of reindeer milk tears. That's the thing. And no, it's not as weird as it sounds. It tastes faintly of pine and smoke, and it warms your chest like a pocket furnace. We walk at twilight today, they say. Easier to see the skies. Binds mainstream historical fact. Long before satellites beamed directions into your smartphone, the Sami had already mastered celestial navigation. Not just the North Star, though that was important, but also lesser-known constellations like Cassiopeia, Ursa Major, and a whole catalogue of seasonal patterns that helped them time migrations and choose routes. One oral map included not just the stars, but which direction they moved across the sky during specific months. This was no casual stargazing. It was a living, practical calendar. As you climb a small ridge, your guide pauses and points toward a cluster of stars just emerging. In the dusk, "That's Ruovidi," they whisper. "The antler of the sky. Reindeer." You blink. "Which one?" They smile. "It depends on the story." And here's your quirky tidbit. Some Sami legends say the entire sky is the body of a great cosmic reindeer galloping through the void. The stars are its veins, the auroras its breath. When the northern lights ripple overhead, they say that's the creature exhaling. Others warn children not to wave at the auroras, because if you do, the lights might swoop down and take you, or worse, tickle you to death with ghostly fingers. No, really, that's a thing. You walk slowly now, tracing the horizon with your eyes. The Sami didn't just look for stars, they also read the cloud. Your guide explains that high cirrus clouds, stretched like strands of hair, often mean a storm within a day or two. Puffy ones, like the world's softest pillows, mean calmer weather, and the color of the sky at different times of day. That's a whole science in itself. Pink in the morning, your guide says. Storm by night. You pause. Isn't that just a saying? They chuckle. It's all just sayings. Until it saves your life. You reach the crest of the ridge, and for the first time, you see the full northern horizon. The tundra sprawls out beneath you, a frozen sea of blue and white, and above it, the stars begin their slow, careful dance. You can see Orion's belt, though. The Sami have a different name for it. It's the three hunters, your guide says, chasing a fox made of fire. Historians still argue whether Sami sky maps were influenced by neighboring cultures or developed independently. Some parallels exist between Sami and Norse constellations, while others are uniquely their own. One theory suggests the Sami relied more on seasonal positioning than shape matching, watching how stars moved between certain peaks or trees as time passed, rather than imagining them as animals or gods. But it's hard to separate astronomy from mythology in any ancient culture, especially in this case. Asterisk. As the sky darkens further, something begins to shimmer faintly across the horizon. At first, it's like the sky is breathing a slow green exhale curling through the atmosphere. Then it brightens, thickens, and suddenly the northern lights are dancing. Long fingers of light ripple across the heavens, bending and folding, dipping and rising like kelp swaying in a cosmic tide. You've seen pictures before, of course, but nothing prepares you for the feeling of being beneath them. It's like standing under a giant silk curtain that's somehow on fire, ice cold and completely silent. Your guide watches you watch it, then nods. This is when we don't move. You stand still, letting the cold climb into your boots and your breath frost your lashes. The lights twist into a great arc, then split into ribbons, flickering like fireflies stitched into space. That one, your guide whispers, means the herds will move early this year. You glance at them sideways. You can read the lights. They shrug. Sometimes, if you know the stories, you want to ask more, but the silence seems too sacred to break. Instead, you let the moment stretch, long and hushed and lovely. Eventually, the auroras begin to fade, replaced by deeper stars. Your guide points again. That's the sleeping bear, they say. We don't walk north when it yawns. You think about your own methods of navigation, zooming in on digital maps, waiting for the blue dot to catch up, yelling at your phone when it lags. Compared to that, this feels like reading poetry from the sky. Everything means something, even the quiet spaces. As you head back down the ridge, the stars wheel above you, cold and constant. You're not lost, not anymore. Because out here, direction isn't just about where you're going. It's about how deeply you're willing to listen. By now, your boots are worn soft at the heel. Your breath naturally slows with the rhythm of the cold, and your fingers curl around a warm mug like it's an old friend. You've followed the wind, read the snow, walked by the stars. But now, as your guide leads you further into the white expanse, you're about to learn something quieter, yet more powerful. How the Sami listen, not just to the elements, but to the world itself. Today isn't about movement. Today, you sit. You settle onto a reindeer hide mat beside a shallow stream, frozen in mid-babble. Trees line the banks, their branches powdered in rime. It's so quiet you can hear the tiny cracks forming in the ice, like whispers in a vast, sleeping library. Your guide doesn't speak. Instead, they close their eyes, breathe in deeply, and just listen. You do the same, though you feel a little silly at first. But then there it is, the sound of a ptarmigan scratching under the snow, the creak of trees swaying in sub-zero joints, the faint whistle of wind curling around a distant bluff. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Sami were and are masters of what scholars now call environmental acoustic orientation. In other words, they could navigate and assess their surroundings based on sound specifically, how noise behaves in open snowfields, dense forests, or icy valleys. A herder could hear reindeer hooves crunching from kilometers away. Hunters identified game not just by tracks, but by movement echoes and storm fronts. You could hear them breathing across the landscape long before they arrived. You close your eyes again and try to map the world through your ears. It's harder than it sounds, pun entirely intended. But soon you can almost sense where the hills rise and where the snow flattens out, just by the way wind brushes past your cheek. And now, your quirky tidbit. Some Sami stories tell of people who could speak to silence. These weren't just myths. They were respected elders who claimed they could hear the thoughts of the forest. One such figure, a joiker named Mikkel, supposedly sat by a stream for 3 days and heard a birch tree confess its age. Another tale tells of a woman who could predict the arrival of wolves just from how quiet the crows became. The louder the silence, she would say, the closer the danger. You shift slightly, trying not to crinkle your jacket. Your guide raises an eyebrow. Clearly you've disrupted something sacred. The wind can't teach you if you talk over it, they murmur. You nod and sit straighter, more alert now. You might think this is all just beautiful nonsense, but modern scientists have actually studied the acoustic geography of snow. Snow absorbs high-frequency sounds, which explains why everything feels muffled in winter, but low rumbles like those of large animals or, avalanches can carry for miles. The Sami instinctively knew this. They built their shelters with snow pile walls, not just for insulation, but for Samic clarity. Inside a goatee or lavu, you can whisper and still be heard by someone across the fire. Useful when you don't want the wolves or you're in loads to eavesdrop. Historians still argue whether the Sami developed their acute listening skills purely from necessity, or whether it became a cultural art form. Some argue that environmental hearing was trained from childhood through games that involved tracking hidden family members by ear. Others believe it was more spiritual, that the Sami saw listening as a form of respect, a way of honoring the landscape as a living thing with its own language. As the day passes, you remain mostly still, ears wide open. Eventually, your guide breaks the silence not with speech, but with song. It's not really singing, not the way you expect. It's joik, a Sami vocal tradition unlike anything you've heard. There are no lyrics in the usual sense, no rhymes, no verses. Instead, it's a vocal painting, a way to become something through sound. One joik might represent a river, another a reindeer, another the feeling of missing home. Your guide's joik is low and warm, vibrating in their chest, echoing through the frozen air like a memory you forgot you had. You listen, half awake, as the joik curls through the trees. Each note feels like it belongs to the forest. And maybe it does. The joik fades. Your guide opens their eyes. That one, they say softly, was for you. You blink, me. They nod. You came with heavy feet, but now you walk with ears. You try not to grin too widely. After all, you're trying to blend in with the wilderness, not make it roll its eyes at you. That evening, back in camp, you catch yourself doing something new. When you hear a rustle, you don't look, listen, a snort in the dark. Probably the reindeer, a whistle, just the fire shifting. But that long, low groan, wind over ice, moving east. You whisper it to yourself like a secret. Later, lying under the dome of your tent, you don't need music or white noise. The world is already humming. You just hadn't noticed before. One last note. Your guide tosses you a small carved pendant before turning in, shaped like an ear-stylized polished bone. To remind you, they say, even home has things to teach you, if you stop talking long enough. And so you fall asleep, not to silence, but to story. The morning is a hush of blue-gray mist, curling over the snow like a blanket someone forgot to shake out. Your breath steams in front of you as you push aside the hide flap of your tent. You're getting good at this now, waking up slowly, ears half-tuned to the world, feet already guessing the texture of the day's snow. Your guide is already up, as always, sipping from a birchwood cup and eyeing the horizon like it might confess a secret today. You're learning how to read, not just where you are, but what's coming. Because long before meteorologists gave you 7-day forecasts with emojis, the Sami had their own ways of predicting the weather just as accurate, and probably with fewer commercial breaks. The air today has a sting. It'll snow before dusk, your guide mutters. Can't you smell it? You take a deep sniff. Just pine needles, fire smoke, and a hint of something electric-like licking a battery in winter. Yeah, you lie. Totally smells like snow. Mainstream historical fact. The Sami were extraordinary weather forecasters, especially skilled at short-range predictions. They watched wind patterns, tracked animal behavior, and interpreted cloud shapes to anticipate changes in temperature, snowfall, and storms. For nomadic herders and hunters, reading the weather wasn't a fun party trick, it was survival. A misjudged blizzard could mean frozen reindeer, lost tools, or worse. You trudge beside your guide toward a low hill crest. They stop and squat, running their gloved fingers through the snow. See this, they say, holding up a layer like pastry, new snow sitting on a crust. That's a bad base. Could slide. You nod, impressed. You'd barely noticed there was more than one kind of snow. Here's your quirky tidbit. The Sami language has over 300 words for snow and ice. that's not a meme, it's linguistic reality. From Voati soft snow, good for skiing, to Shauna's crusty snow surface after a sudden thaw, each word carries practical meaning. One wrong term, and someone could misjudge a slope, fall through thin ice, or lead an entire herd into a snow trap. Asterisk. You try using one in a sentence. This snow is ... Goldu. Your guide smirks. No, Goldu is airborne snow. Like a small flurry. This is Scarta. Snow hardened after being walked on. You blink. Right. That was my second guess. You crest the hill, and the sky opens above you in layers bands of dull grey in the west, whiter and higher to the north. Fronts moving, your guide says, pointing. Clouds riding low, fast, might dump snow early. You watch, trying to train your eyes to the subtleties. Is it always this obvious? They grin. Only when you've spent 40 winters watching it. Historians still argue whether the Sami learned their meteorological skills purely from observation or through a more intuitive, possibly spiritual connection to the land. Some accounts suggest experienced herders could feel approaching storms in their bones like living barometers. Others say it was simply accumulated knowledge passed through song, story, and repetition. After all, when your life depends, born snow, not falling off a cliff with you on it, you pay attention. You descend the hill and pause at a stream knot, frozen, oddly enough. Open water, your guide mutters. Bad sign. You raise an eyebrow. Why? They tapped the ground with a stick. Means warm air moved through. Could trigger Thofri's patterns. Dangerous for the herds. As if on cue, a reindeer herd passes in the distance, slow, deliberate, their snouts pointed low. Your guide watches them, nodding. They feel it too. See how they bunch up. They're conserving warmth. You marvel at it, not just the animal's instinct, but the human ability to notice that instinct, interpret it, and make decisions from it. A gust of wind curls around your collar, bringing with it the faintest smell of something mineral-like. Ice scraping rock. There it is, your guide murmurs. Storm breath. You stop and face into it. Cold brushes your cheeks, tugging your scarf slightly. And you realize you can smell something different now. Sharper, like air that hasn't been breathed yet. Later, huddled in your tent, you notice how your body has changed. You no longer brace against the coldness. Just another message, now part of the ongoing dialogue between you and this ancient land. You no longer watch the sky just for stars. You watch for signs. For moods. Your guide hands you a flat round bread and nods toward. Befire. You're starting to read it, they say. The snow, the sky, the wind. Took me 10 years. You, maybe 10 days more. They chuckle. But you listen. That's rare. You eat slowly. The bread smoky and dense. Outside, the first flakes begin to fall. They drift down lazily, like they're unsure whether to bother. Then more come. Faster, thicker. Told you. Your guide says. You smile, mouth full. You did. Before sleeping, you jot notes In a leather-bound pad your guide gave you Gordu, Iskarta cloud riding low, reindeer bunching, smell of ice equals storm breath. You pause, then underline that last one twice. Not because it's the most accurate, but because it's the one you felt. As the snow taps the canvas of your tent and the wind sings a slow, sleepy joik, you think maybe weather isn't something to predict. Maybe it's something to meet like an old friend arriving from the north with news of what's next. You wake to a thick woolen silence, not the absence of sound, but the kind of hush that makes even your thoughts tiptoe. Snow blankets the world outside, soft and heavy. Your tent sags slightly, burdened by the night's snowfall, and everything feels wrapped in cotton. You slip, on your boots, and crawl into the morning with practiced ease, brushing off the fresh layer of powder like dandruff from a sleepy sky dot today. You're not walking far. You're learning to stay put, but not to rest. You're learning how to be found, or not. Welcome to the Sami world of stealth, camouflage, and survival without radar, without tech, without even footprints, if they could help it. You're about to become the thing that watches while remaining unseen. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Sami hunters and herders used environmental camouflage techniques that rivaled those of any military scout. Their clothing blended with the seasons-like toned furs for snow, earthy colors for lichen-streaked summer hills. More impressively, they knew how to move without alerting prey or enemies. Because yes, while today's Sami life is largely peaceful, their ancestors lived through times of raiding parties, territorial conflicts, and colonizing pressures from the Norwegians, Swedes, Finns, and Russians. Sometimes vanishing wasn't optional. It was survival. You follow your guide as they kneel by a hillock covered in snow-stiffened lichen. With practiced hands, they pull their coat hood tight, draw up a white outer wrap, and lie flat. You blink and suddenly, there, gone. Just a rock, a bump in the snow. You copy them somewhat less gracefully and wriggle into position beside a crooked pine. Your breath forms puffs that threaten to give you away. But you learn to exhale slowly, evenly, letting the vapor drift sideways rather than skyward. Don't fight the cold, your guide whispers. Let it take you. The less heat you throw, the less you're seen. Quirky tidbit time. Sami hunters would sometimes smear themselves with pine resin and charcoal to dull their scent and darken exposed skin. Some even used powdered lichen to mask their breath, inhaling through it in tiny trickles. Was it effective? Hard to say. It sure kept the mosquitoes away in summer, and maybe even made the reindeer think twice. Historians still argue whether the Sami developed these techniques independently or adapted them over centuries of contact with neighboring cultures. There are theories that Russian forest scouts taught them some of the local tricks, while others claim the Sami were teaching others all along. Who knows, maybe a wandering Norseman once watched a Sami elder disappear into a snowbank and muttered, "That's witchcraft," before promptly getting lost for 3 days. Your guide motions silently. A hair little snowy blurries, nibbling on bark just 30 feet away. You freeze, every muscle, every twitch. You become snow, cold, breathless earth. The hare looks up, sniffs the air, then hops closer, closer, until you can see the tiny rim of frost icing its whiskers dot. Then it bolts, not because it saw you, but because something bigger spooked it from the other side. Your guide doesn't move. They whisper, "See, not everything is about you." Fair enough. Later, you sit by a cluster of boulders shaped like a giant's teeth. Your guide tells you a story, not a bedtime tale, but a survival one. There was a man once, herder, trapped in whiteout. No sun, no tree line, lost for 2 days. He crawled inside a snowdrift, used a reindeer carcass as shelter. Smelled bad, but it saved his life. You make a face, sounds cozy. They shrug, better than freezing, or worse, wandering in circles until your legs give up. Bew, duck that one away. File it under things I hope never to use. You walk on, silently, scanning the horizon. Everything looks the same. Now smooth hills, white sky, occasional clusters of trees like black brushstrokes. You realize, without Bisen, without trails, you would be so lost. And yet your guide leads without hesitation. They use subtle markers you barely notice, drifts shaped by last night's wind. The way the snow settles differently on one side of a tree. A set of ant tracks curving east. You're not watching hard enough, they say. You're looking for signs like a tourist. Start looking like you belong. It stings a little, but they're right, so you practice. You learn how to step without leaving clear tracks, how to double back and sweep snow over your path, how to whisper with your hands instead of your mouth. You even learn how to mimic a raven's croak badly. But your guide laughs and says, if nothing else, you'll make a good decoy. As dusk settles, you build a snow shelter, not a proper igloo, but a quincy, made by hollowing out a packed mound. You light a tiny fire using birch bark, and it glows like an ember in the cold dark. From inside, the snow filters all sound. It's like being in a world made of wool, cozy, silent, safe. You almost forget there's a storm gathering. Overhead, just before sleep, your guide scratches a symbol into the snow outside the entrance, a looping spiral. An old mark that, they say, means someone passed here and lived to tell it. You nod, and as your eyes drift shut, you think you're not invisible. Not really, but for now, you are unseen. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. You open your eyes to silence, but not emptiness. The kind of quiet that comes only after a storm, when even the wind seems spent, and the world lies buried under its own breath. Snow curves around your shelter like the folds of a sleeping giant. And when you push your way out, light spills in soft, blue-tinted clean. There are no tracks, not yours, not anyone's. It's like the earth hit reset overnight. Today marks the end of your time here. Not because you've seen everything far from it, but because the journey has looped full circle. You've wandered these lands without a compass, without GPS, without a map more complex than what lives in the eyes of a reindeer or the grain of the wind. And somehow, you're still here. In fact, you're more here than you've ever been. Your guide greets you at the edge of the shelter, their face partly hidden by a snow-flecked scarf. Well, they say, time for you to walk alone today. You raise your eyebrows. What if I get lost? They smile. Then you'll learn something else. Mainstream historical fact. For centuries, Sami children were taught navigation, not through charts or formal instruction, but by participating walking, routes again and again, committing the curves of rivers and ridges to memory. This wasn't rote learning. It was embodied experience. You didn't memorize a path. You became part of it. As you begin your solo trek, the world feels larger somehow. Not because it's unfamiliar, but because you're finally seeing all the things that were invisible before. A particular cluster of birches you recognize from your first day, now half buried. The distant rock spire your guide used as a landmark. A winding gully you once thought was random, now clearly a runoff trail the reindeer follow in spring. You pause atop a ridge, looking over a vast frozen lake. The clouds are high today, light trailing through them like strands of silver hair. And in that space between knowing where you are and not knowing where you're going, you feel oddly calm. Here's your final quirky tidbit. Some Sami believe in sacred stones or formations, said to offer guidance or luck. These were idols, but points of reverence, often left with gifts like antlers, coins, or folded cloth. If you found yourself lost, you might stop by one, press your hand to it, and ask for direction. Not from a god, but from the land itself. You find one, just before the next hill. There it stands, a crooked, lichen-covered rock, jutting like a bent finger from the earth. Someone's tied a thin strip of red cloth to it. It flutters slightly in the still air. You don't know why, but you touch it, just in case. Historians still argue whether Side stones were truly spiritual or simply psychological anchors in a harsh world. Was it religion or ritualized sanity? A practical way to keep people focused when wandering the snow could eat your thoughts like quicksand. Doesn't matter, it worked. Your guide is waiting near the forest's edge when you finally emerge. They don't say anything at first, just nod. Then you found your way. You grin. I think I remembered more than I thought. They toss, pew. You bundle your things, neatly wrapped. Then you're ready. As you pack, you look back one last time at the landscape. Not to say goodbye, but to etch it into memory one final time. Every drift, every ripple in the snow, every possible direction you could take if you ever had to again. Then your guide holds out a thin reindeer antler, carved with small patterns just enough to fit in your palm. Take this. They say it points nowhere, but it reminds you that you can go anywhere. You slip it into your coat and begin walking, not just away from the Sami camp, but forward, outward, into whatever space comes next. Maybe a forest, maybe a city, maybe just the next story. But part of you stays here, a quiet presence among the reindeer and the wind-carved hills, a breath in the snow, and now you settle into bed, or into the corner of a couch, or maybe a quiet seat on a late-night train. Wherever you are, let your shoulders drop just a little. Let the tension go. Let the journey through snow, silence, and sky settle gently into your body like drifting powder on a windowsill. The Sami landscape fades into the edges of your mind now, not disappearing, just quieting. The crunch of your boots, the hiss, biv of the wind, the muffled breath of your guide beside you, all of it softens, blends, stretches out like a woolen blanket being pulled slowly over your thoughts. You remember the cold, but not as a sting anymore, just a sensation, a presence, something that taught you to pay attention, to feel your feet in the earth, your breath in the sky, your place in a world without coordinates. Somewhere far behind you, the reindeer still walk, the joik still drifts over snowy valleys. The snow still falls, maybe a little slower, now catching, be moonlight in 1,000 tiny reflections. And in your hand, maybe only in memory, that carved antler rests. It doesn't point you north or south or anywhere in particular, but it reminds you that you were there, that you listened, that you learned to find your way without a compass. Now, close your eyes. Let everything go quiet. You're not lost. You're just resting good night.